Breaking down The Chosen Season 5, they've obviously wrapped up filming, but the Chosen obviously posts every single week on their behind the scenes of what was going on set during those weeks. So let's break down this week's episode on YouTube and talk about what's happening over here. Let's jump in.
Every scene is sadder and more intense and sort of overwhelming.
I mean, it's a really tough scene.
I'm saying I want to defend him, Z, but I don't know how.
This week is a rare 6-day week.
So of course we begin with a scene of disciples arguing, because why not?
So that they can get to the other side? No, I think it was legit. I was half joking, but now I'm just going to pretend that I was just that smart.
So they can get to the other side. That's kind of true. They do need to get through all of this stuff, and so they argue all the time in order to figure out these things. However, they do argue sometimes in vain, right? Focusing on the wrong things, as we see Thomas back here.
Hey, man, they called for first team. Can we be professional, please?
Go.
Amateurs.
Go.
How you doing today, Giovanni?
Well, I'm wrapped, so okay, have a good time.
He's wrapped, which means that he's done with filming for the day, so the rest of them are kind of grabbing him to go into here. Not sure if he's joking or not there.
All right, here's play. And action.
So here we see a little bit of the setup. We see some lights over here. We see some of the actors behind the camera. Of course, even when they're behind the camera, they obviously do their best to give their best performance so that whoever is in front of camera can kind of play off of them during these scenes.
Who here has known him the longest?
Who here has known him the longest? They're probably arguing about, obviously they argue a lot in scripture about who is the greatest. And so that may be part of what they're arguing about here, but it could be other things as well.
Never seen him do anything like that.
So they're talking about a situation, we're going to hear about this in a second, but they're talking about a situation that has happened recently. Have you ever seen Jesus do anything like that before? I think they're talking about, the context clues of this video anyway, shows that they're talking about him interacting with the Pharisees and the rest of the people in the temple specifically. This is a huge thing that Jesus does during the last week of his life, and so we're seeing the aftermath of that here.
We are asked to make a statement. How can we defend both his behavior and words?
Months ago, in a whole nother state, we filmed an incredibly intense scene with Jesus and the disciples. Now we have to bring everybody back to the same mindset. How hard is that to bring all that mood back to where it was?
Well, that's my whole job, is make sure that we are keeping track of the overall arc for the season. Big James and Peter walked in, grabbed John. You guys were doing all that stuff.
How's that doing? Good? Good.
I was like, why are you hiding behind me?
I don't want Dallas to see me checking with you.
See, I feel like we've gotten so much coverage of you in the scene. Like, you could just go sit down.
Totally.
And it's really the timing. Remember, we shot this scene right before this one 2 weeks ago. Remember where you were emotionally? You got to carry that into it. And then I've also got to be thinking of where they're going to be going next. Right-sizing the emotional journey of each of the characters. It's just that in this show, we've got a lot more to keep track of than the average show.
Yeah, this is one of the hard things about The Chosen in general, right? Because The Chosen does not have 5 main characters, right? It's got like 15 or more, right? You've got the 12 apostles plus Jesus plus Mary, Tamar, Joanna, Mother Mary, right? Then on top of that, you have Gaius, Quintus, and not in this season, but you're going to have, obviously, you're going to have new people that take their places, like Caiaphas, Pilate, Pilate's wife, Claudia. You're going to have a bunch of different stuff. Atticus, right? That kind of, there's so many characters that are super important within this show, and a lot of them are biblically significant. So it's like, there's so much to keep track of. That is the part that I do not envy of Dallas, for sure.
I'm saying I want to defend him, Z, but I don't know how.
Look, I agree with Philip and Matthew.
Everyone has different perspectives, and I kind of love it because if you think about it back then, let's get 12 people with their different backgrounds all in a room together. How do you think that's going to go? And that's what makes great writing and great drama and makes people want to follow these characters.
Now, I think personally that back here, when they're talking about this other scene that they're coming from, right? I believe personally that this scene is not only Jesus teaching, right? But I think it may have something to do with the adulterous woman, the woman caught in adultery, and how Jesus responds to that, right? How he responds to he without sin cast the first stone, and then how he yells at the Pharisees here as well. I think there's going to be pieces of this where he brings back those 7 woes to the Pharisees. I think there's going to be pieces of this where he's really digging into them in a way that he hasn't before, and so it'll be interesting no matter what. I think this is going to be one of the biggest scenes of season 5. We know that this is like a 16 or 17 minute scene, so it's very long. It's going to take us a while to deep dive into and talk through. So this is obviously a very important scene for the season, which obviously translates to this next scene that we're going into here, right? Turns into a very important scene to debrief and see how the apostles respond to Jesus speaking here. It's going to be really, really cool to kind of dive into it. We'll see.
How do you think that's going to go? And that's what makes great writing and great drama and makes people want to follow these characters.
Every time someone starts to speak, I picked someone else.
It is always interesting when our main cast for a specific scene become the background.
You're remembering what the background is for this one, right? You're cleaning and moving. If you need to move and adjust things, then move and adjust things. It'll look great. Got any ropes to tie and untie?
Seems like there's a lot of pressure when first scene becomes background.
Pressure? Deep background. They don't even tell you when it's deep. Yeah, but
They can't even drop the main cast thing because immediately they're thinking of continuity. Side note, nobody's going to notice the continuity because it's deep background.
He says no one will notice the continuity, but we will. If anybody on Earth, it's the super sleuths that are going to notice the continuity issues. What he means by continuity issues is, for example, in a shot where someone's hair is up or down or like in front of their shoulder or behind their shoulder, and then it kind of switches back and forth between the shots, right? Because they took several takes of the scene and they look slightly different in each of those takes, so you can see kind of where things are moving and messed up a little bit. Or if like a pillow is in a certain area and then it gets moved to somewhere else, right? We'll be able to tell. We'll sneak out the deep background and see what's different for sure.
It's going to be blurry.
We have to get all the leaven out of Reza.
Yes, no leaven. Come on. Let's cut.
So here, let's go back to that scene right there and just dive into see what's going on there. We see that Dallas has a scene here with, looks like John, James, and Jesus. I think this is possibly the scene where he tells them to go get ready for the Last Supper. We kind of broke this down before, where Jesus is talking to Peter and James and John, and he says, go find this guy that's carrying water, and then he'll take you to his house, and then it'll be furnished in the upper room, and that's where we're going to have the Last Supper, right? So I think that's the scene that's kind of going on here. Probably a little bit of a funny part that Dallas is talking about, or they're doing bloopers here, and kind of going through that. So we see a couple different camera angles that are set up here as well for this scene in specific. So we see Simon over here, then we see Big James and John, and then of course Jesus there.
Come on. Let's cut. Yes.
Well, here we are, day number 6 of the week.
Now this shot, real quick, I'll just explain what this is later on. Of course, we got Pilate's kind of area here. We saw several scenes of this during the filming of this season. This set is really amazing for Pilate's kind of palace here in Jerusalem. Pilate is going to be the one on the left side there. The people that are sitting there currently are just stand-ins. So we're going to see Pilate on the left side over there. Then we're going to see Caiaphas and Atticus, I believe, or Caiaphas and no, I think it is Atticus. I've got to go back and look. I don't think it's Herod. It might be Herod, though. I can't remember. It's either Caiaphas and Atticus or Caiaphas and Herod, but they're on the other side of the table talking to him about what's going on. I believe it's Atticus, but I can't remember off the top of my head. So
It is very rare that, the show ever films on a Saturday.
We got to be done by a certain date, so 5-day weeks didn't get us there, so we got to do at least 1 6-day week.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. Yeah. No fun at all.
I wonder why it is that they have to be done by a specific date, like that tight. Possibly just because of different schedules or different things that like Dallas is committed to, or that's what they can afford. No, because they're still doing the same amount of days. They just couldn't go into the next week or whatever. So maybe it is a money thing, like they didn't want to pay for hotels and stuff throughout the weekend into the following Monday, maybe. I don't know. But obviously there's a reason. It's most likely a money reason that they don't want to pay for extra things over a certain period of time. Anyway, but yeah, interesting.
Saturday.
Happy Saturday.
So this is our first kind of real look at the women's area behind the scenes. We can see across the hall looks like the room that the boys are staying in over there. We've got some beds on the floor and then some different beds that are set up. This is where we saw the boys previously as they were kind of moving into this area. Then across the hallway, we see the women here in this room with some canopy beds. It looks very nice, right? And they're all kind of setting up their bunk beds, or not bunk beds, but their bunks here.
So today's your last day of season 5. How does it feel to finish another season of The Chosen?
For me, it feels like every scene is sadder and more intense and sort of overwhelming. And I think like the first time Mary is not thinking about her past or who she is, and she's just like focused on trying to help Jesus.
I think Mary will have a way smaller portion of this season. I think a lot of times we're seeing Mary kind of diminish and diminish and diminish. She's not meant to be a huge main character of the crucifixion week. She was there for parts of it. She's going to be a huge character of the resurrection section, obviously, as she is the main woman who kind of finds Jesus, right? And I believe in The Chosen, she will be the one who finds Jesus first, resurrected, and then tells everybody else, and then they run and they see, and everything else happens. So I think she's going to be a major character in season 7, but I think in season 5 and 6, her character will diminish a little bit and not have as big of a role. Obviously, we're seeing Joanna here kind of come into her own and really become a follower of Jesus for the first time, whereas before she was kind of a follower from afar, right? And so now she's actually going with Jesus and providing for the group in person and all of that. So it's really interesting to see her here, and I wonder how her character is going to shape out this season as well.
I felt like every scene I've had has been me turning to Tamar going like, is she okay? And then Mary walking off.
Yeah, Mary is struggling probably because she sees what's coming up in the future. She knows more than pretty much anybody else in the group that Jesus is going to die and soon. And so she has way more of an intuition, whereas Joanna and Tamar may not see the full picture yet. And so it's going to come as way more of a surprise to them probably in the show. So, yeah.
I got to spend a lot of time with the girls this season. Like, we get to see them kind of interact a bit more, which we never got to see. And that felt...
Well, we've seen it before, but not as much, especially with Joanna. We've never seen Tamar interact with Joanna. I think they'll probably get along quite well. They're both kind of like upper class, if that makes sense. Tamar comes from royalty. She's used to having very nice things, right? We see that in kind of season 3, whenever Joanna gives her first donation. We see that Tamar immediately recognizes the fabric. She wants to sell the fabric for a certain amount. So I believe Tamar and Joanna should get along pretty nicely.
Nice, because we keep each other laughing. It was really nice to be with them and have them there through that.
Tamar! That's also a picture wrap on Amber.
Even a picture wrap on Liz as Mary Magdalene, yes.
A little bit of an audio snafu here.
And it's even a picture wrap on Liz as Mary Magdalene. Yes.
So they're all picture wrapped, which means that they're done filming for the season, and that's pretty much the end of the season.
On the app, we've got our temple.
So there's that. Now let's jump over to the bonus video for this week, and we see that they have a kind of a synagogue breakdown. So let's talk about this one.
App. This is the sequel to that temple tour that we did with our production designer, James Cunningham.
Only this time, we're going to take a deeper look at the Capernaum Synagogue and the set that's built right here in Texas. And
yeah, some people are asking real fast, where's Susanna, though? Susanna is nowhere to be seen. We don't know. She kind of hasn't really made an appearance in any way yet, but we do know that she's there from scripture, so she should have made an appearance, but there's also some other characters that still haven't made an appearance as well. The weird part for me is, like, those should be the first character's quota to be in the show, right? Like, for example, why is it Susanna instead of Rama? Like, yeah, I know that they knew they were going to kill Rama from a long time ago, but why isn't Susanna showing up at all? instead of like, why is Tamar there and not Susanna? Is Tamar going to change her name to Susanna? Like, what is happening there, right? Same thing with Matthias, right? Matthias and some other followers of Jesus that were supposed to be around from the very beginning. I think there's just not enough bandwidth. It's not going to be great cinematographically in order to show that many people following Jesus at all times. So it's a bit harder, right, to kind of jump into that. So anyway, that's kind of the thought process there, I think.
Even inside that synagogue right there, it's a totally different set altogether. So let's check it out. So now that we're back in Texas, of course, we got to follow that up with the synagogue tour. I think the funny bit of thing with us here is in Texas, on the outside, that's not the temple.
No, that's the Capernaum Synagogue. And then on the inside is the Jerusalem Sanhedrin.
And it's the only building that's air conditioned. It's a big thing to know when you're there on set, for sure.
As you guys were designing this synagogue, and you know, we have the lake right over there and all of that stuff, where did you find the historical layout for this to be able to design this to be as much like first century Capernaum as possible?
Well, we have archaeological evidence.
Yep, so this is a real picture of Capernaum. This is a 4th century synagogue that is built on top of the original synagogue. You're going to be able to see in some pictures later that they show, but you can see in the far top section here, I know it's really a grainy picture, in the far top section here you can see the black basalt stone. That is the volcanic stone that they made all of their buildings out of before, during the time of Christ, basically. You can see that underneath this synagogue is the foundations of the original synagogue that would have been during the 1st century, and that is made of black basalt stone as well. Later on, the Byzantines came, which were basically an offshoot of the Romans, who were Jewish and Christian and different things that kind of came from that Roman Empire period. And so the Byzantines here helped to create different pieces of the churches and different things around the area. Now, this was created by the Jews during the 4th century in Capernaum, and then kind of across the way on the site of Peter's home is a Byzantine church that was built, I can't remember what century it was, but a little bit later on as well. So there's kind of Christian archaeological finds here, as well as obviously Jewish archaeological finds which tie to the Bible. So this synagogue in particular was not the one that was built during the time of Jesus, but the one underneath it, or at least the foundations of the one underneath it, are still there today. So really, really cool stuff.
Of Capernaum, and they kind of have like the layout of what Capernaum looked like. And the synagogues were often placed on the highest point in the city, kind of a symbol of looking up to God, which is why they would often put steps going up into the temple, because it's like you were ascending up to God, or the high places.
Whoa, I did not know that.
Yeah, and the steps would not be normal stairs. So, for example, in the synagogue in Chorazim, or even in the temple, right? You can see that the stairs are not as we would build them today. For example, if you're building stairs in your home, you want the stairs to be even rise and run, right? Which means that they rise the same amount that they run, right? Or at least those things are even as they go up throughout the staircase, so that you can kind of turn your brain off and muscle memory will take over and you'll be able to walk up the stairs easily. This is not the case in synagogues, and this is very purposeful. The rise and run of the staircases at the synagogues would be offset and different. Some stairs would be wider, some stairs would be really short, some stairs would be kind of off kilter and different, because they want you to be able to focus as you go into the temple, so that as you're rising up to get into the synagogue or into the temple, you are focused and you are mindful about your steps. It's not something that you're just going into flippantly, you're running in because you're late. These things are very purposeful in Jewish engineering to get you to purposefully think about God every step of the day. That's why we have the mezuzah, right? That we saw previously, the things on the doorway that you would touch it and then you'd kiss your fingers, right? That is why we have the different things that you would wear throughout the day. For example, the tzitzit, right? All these things are reminders of God throughout the day. It's almost like a constant communion, right? Where you're having these things that remind you of God all the time. And so that's what we're seeing here as well.
If you go
Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying this video, a great free way to help is just to watch the rest of this video all the way to the end of the video if you can. And then if you really like us, you can watch another video after that. This will tell the YouTube algorithm that you like our channel and that our channel is good enough to share with other people. And it would really, really help us out. But if you want to go above and beyond, you can go to snipesupport.com and pledge $5, $10, or $25 a month and really help us out on a consistent basis to put out more videos just like this. Anyway, let's get back to the video.
If you go to Capernaum today, you'll see black basalt stone, which is what most...
Yep. So right here, you're seeing the top area here, like I said, the late 4th century AD, that's what you're seeing here is the white synagogue. And then on the bottom is the remains of the synagogue of Jesus, which is during the 1st century. So this black basalt stone is the original stone that would have created at least the foundation of the synagogue in Capernaum. Then above that is the white stone that was created later during the 4th century after Christ there. Some people are asking, have I ever been to Capernaum? Yes, I've been there several times. I've got a bunch of pictures and different things like that from Capernaum myself. And eventually I'm working on a project that maybe you guys could get your hands on some of those as well, but we'll talk about that another time. So here we go.
Most of Capernaum in the 1st century was built out of. In Capernaum, there was 3 doors in the...
So he's kind of pointing out that the Capernaum synagogue probably wouldn't have looked like this. Most likely the Capernaum synagogue was made out of black basalt stone and not this white stone that we're seeing here. I do wonder why they chose to go with so much white stone in Capernaum overall, where all of the buildings that we see there archaeologically today are all built out of that black basalt stone. And not any white stone there. White stone was very much more of a Jerusalem thing because that's the stone that you had. It's literally called Jerusalem stone. And even today, there's an ordinance in Jerusalem that you have to build buildings out of that stone. You can't build it out of any other stone. So when you look at the landscape of Jerusalem, all the buildings look very similar because all of the stone is the exact same stone being used to build the buildings. And so it looks very much more like a Jerusalem building than a Capernaum building to me personally.
Front, and most synagogues will always have 3 doors. It's based off of one of the letters in the Jewish alphabet, and the synagogues would always face south to Jerusalem. And so, yeah, you would see the Sea of Galilee from the synagogue.
I mean, speaking of, I guess...
Not every synagogue is facing that way. For example, the synagogue in Magdala is facing like west. I think the entrance to the synagogue is facing west, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I mean, it's the Sea of Galilee is here. You have the synagogue, and then the entrance to the synagogue is actually facing west. I wonder why that is, actually. I've never really thought about that before. But in Capernaum, it's facing east. At least the 4th century one is facing east, for sure. Interesting. I'll have to think about that another time. But he's saying here that most synagogues would face south. But even this synagogue in this set is not facing south. In terms of where the Sea of Galilee would be. It's facing east, towards the Sea of Galilee. Yeah, I don't know. I give up.
Fresh water source. We want to kind of take a look at the mikvah because there's some cool things about that too.
So a mikvah is...
Yeah, this is really, really cool. I love the mikvah that's there, obviously, on the set. They use this primarily for Eden. Obviously, that's pretty much the only scene that they've really shot in this mikvah here. Most mikvah were not this large, and they didn't have 2 large chambers where you have this large pillar in the middle, especially in Capernaum. It wouldn't have been this ornate. It would have been very much low-key and made out of, again, black basalt stone. It wouldn't have been made out of this. And so it's interesting. Obviously, it looks way better on film to have it look like this, so I get why they did it. But I've got several pictures of Magdala, 1st century mikvah, and even in Chorazim, there's some mikvah that date back to a pretty far away. I think closer to the 3rd or 4th century, something like that. But anyway, all of them look really, really similar in the way that they're constructed. And normally it's kind of a one singular passage. So you kind of walk down the one side and then you walk out the other. There's nothing like kind of separating it like this big one here. Yeah, so.
Is a pool where you would come to before you would go to synagogue, and you would take all your clothes off, and so you'd go down into the pool. And
yep. So here in this scene, obviously they're not going to have any naked people in in this scene in particular. But here, Eden would have been naked. Anybody that's with her in this would have been naked. But normally you'd go by yourself.
Then you'd come up the other side clean. All of the mikvahs had what they would call living water. So what that meant is the water was usually moving.
It turns out there might be living water underneath our feet.
So living water in the mikvah would have been very important. Imagine if you had no way to change the water, right? There were certain mikvah that you would change the water manually during certain times. But here he's saying that these mikvah would have living water, which means that they would help to circulate that water, right? And change it out so it wouldn't become super, super nasty over time, which I'm sure that it would have.
Right now, what is the story behind that?
There's an actual artesian well, which is an underground kind of river or stream that runs along the whole back part of our city. So this spring, we've had so much rain that the well itself underneath was full, and so the streets have been flooding, and you can kind of see it bubbling out of the ground.
The symbolicness of Christ descending, and he's the fulfillment of the mikvah, he is the living water, only to discover, and living water flows underneath where we are standing.
Back then, before the resurrection, where did they even get the idea of like, let's walk down this side and then come out brand new over here? Is that from Old Testament?
Well, Old Testament law over the centuries.
It was law. It was purity laws to keep yourself clean, to make sure that you were, pure before God. It was a huge thing.
In time, it became more of an immersion kind of thing, and you want to cleanse yourself before you go before God.
Now, is that where John the Baptist, his idea of baptism came from?
Essentially, yes. The idea of baptism, of immersing yourself in water, I think that part of it came directly from mikvah and cleansing, and that idea of you are washing something else off and becoming something new. For sure, I think that came from the idea of the mikvah. However, here he's going to explain, I think, pretty well that John obviously had a different purpose in this. It wasn't necessarily the same thing as the mikvah.
Is the mikvah, cleansing yourself before going to God.
John's was more of repentance instead of salvation.
Funny facts about this beautiful room. This is where
I would say it's more of repentance instead of purity. I don't think the mikvah for the Jews was a form of salvation. The only thing that could save them was God, right? I think this was more of a purity thing, to be right before God rather than salvation itself, if that makes sense.
Eden was cleansed, but we put a fake ceiling on it.
Or maybe he's talking about in terms of baptism, like baptism is salvation, but baptism is a showing of salvation, not necessarily the thing that saves you, right? I don't know. I'd have to hear that whole conversation to give you better context about what they're saying. They cut it up kind of weird there.
And made it into a really sad room as well.
So the same room that the mikvah is in is the room that John the Baptist actually was killed in, the execution room there. Eventually, once I get approval, I will show you my behind the scenes from the set, and I'll be able to show you this in a little bit better detail of where they are and where all these things took place as well.
Well, it's really hot out here.
It is.
Let's teleport by walking through that door and go from Capernaum to Jerusalem.
Let's go.
So this would be
So the reason why he's saying it's so hot out here and it's better to be indoors is because this is the only place with AC, like I talked about before.
Great Sanhedrin, or the Upper Sanhedrin, which is kind of like our Supreme Court. So if you would go in through the Nicanor Gate, and you would see the Holy of Holies in front of you, off to the right-hand side.
I think this is an argued point. I've seen models that have it in a lot of different areas. Obviously, the Second Temple was destroyed, and we don't have any photos of what the Second Temple looked like. We don't have any map layouts exactly of what the Second Temple looked like. So this is, I believe, is a debated point. I've seen models where the Great Sanhedrin is over to the left, for example, and not the right through the Nicanor gates. So over to the left, past the altar, would be the Great Sanhedrin, and then on the other side there's something else. And so, yeah, I've seen different models kind of showing different things, but yeah, I don't think it matters that much.
Would be where the Upper or Great Sanhedrin would be.
So first off, I'm curious about the floor, because I heard an interesting story about these very tiles that we're standing on.
The actual ones we're standing on right now were actual mosaics that we had made. But recently, I think within the last 10 years, they found some of the actual flooring.
This is I was just confused why they're showing this. This is the Capernaum Synagogue. This has nothing to do with what they're talking about with the Great Sanhedrin. So yeah, I was just confused why they're showing this.
From the Temple Mount. And when we were building this, I found these tiles which kind of mimic what was actually on the floor in the Sanhedrin. I thought it turned out really great and real reminiscent of
Yeah, it looks really, really good.
What it might have looked like. It was kind of a real cool thing to find these.
That type of tiling, I'll kind of go back there.
Might have looked like. It was.
This type of tiling is very common within the Roman-controlled Jewish areas, right? So specifically in, for example, like Caesarea Maritima, this is where Herod the Great built this large city and palace and different things. You can see these kind of like hand-placed little tiny mosaic floors that were just massive everywhere. They're more common as well during like the Byzantine period and some different things there. Obviously, they wouldn't look like tiles like we see on the left, where it's like a full sheet of a tile. They would look way more like we're seeing in the middle here with this little tiny mosaic flooring here. But there's a lot of different things that would happen throughout as well. A lot of different flooring materials and different stuff like that. So obviously, we're not going to get into it here, but yeah.
It's kind of a real cool thing to find these. And we did kind of model it after a synagogue because synagogues would usually have these rows of columns on the sides.
And again, they're free to model it after kind of whatever they think might be right because we don't actually know what it looked like. I've seen some models where it's kind of like you have chairs or different benches around the room, and then in the front of the room, for example, where these thrones are up here, where these seats are, they actually had several different seats for like kind of the main members of the Sanhedrin to sit. There's just different models that have different things in them. So you don't actually fully know 100% what these places would have looked like because they were destroyed several thousand years ago, right?
And then the benches.
There is so much to explore right here in the app and so much great.
So anyway, cool stuff. Love the breakdowns of the BTS. It's really cool to see the sets up close and to see everything kind of going on. Gives us a lot more context for what we look at in the show in general. It gives us a lot more time to kind of dive into the history and everything there. So I love that stuff. Really, really cool.